Welcome to Arirang Land. Open to anyone seeking a first-hand experience of Arirang Studios and all its spaces. We closely follow those who are renting Arirang space for a day and see how their dreams unfold. We invite you to Arirang Land, your stage to bring dreams and hopes to life.
President Lee Jae-myung and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to expand Seoul-Beijing relations and keep up efforts for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Their first phone call included Lee's invitation for Xi to attend the APEC summit hosted by South Korea this November. The South Korean economy continues to face, quote, weak growth, according to the Korea Development Institute. The local think tank points to a slowdown in the construction sector, as well as a fall-off in exports due to U.S. tariffs. The Trump administration is now mobilizing some 700 Marines to LA as a show of force to tame the inflamed immigration protests. The Marines will be joining the thousands of National Guard troops already deployed to the Californian city. Good evening. We begin with President Lee Jae-myung's first conversation with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, since taking office. The two leaders agreed to build up Seoul-Beijing relations. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jang-min starts us off.
During his first half-hour phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Lee Jae-myung invited him to South Korea for the upcoming APEC summit in the southeastern city of Gyeongju this November. If he does attend, it'll be Xi's first visit to the country in 11 years. Tuesday's conversation was friendly and amicable, says Yi's spokesperson, where she congratulated Yi on winning the election, and the two leaders shared similarities in their political career. Their focus was on building a new bilateral relationship, bolstering cooperation in areas that could practically help the lives of the people in both countries.
President Lee expressed hope that South Korea and China will actively promote exchanges and cooperation in various fields, including the economy, security, culture, and people-to-people exchanges based on the spirit of mutual benefit and equality.
Also addressed was North Korea, where Yi asked Xi to play a constructive role for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and Xi responded by saying Beijing will make efforts, saying peace and stability fit into their mutual interests. It's been a week since Yi took office, during which he exchanged greetings and held get-to-know sessions with the leaders of some major countries, first with his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, followed by Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Then came talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
President Yi, during his presidential campaign, said that ROK-US alliance is the most top priority, and then he also put lots of emphasis on the relationship with Japan. Of course, he mentioned that South Korea and Japan, the trilateral cooperation is important. So he simply implement what he has pledged.
The series of talks comes as the newly inaugurated Korean leader prepares for his debut on the multilateral summit stage next week in Canada, where the G7 leaders are set to meet, where sideline summits are possible with Trump and Ishiba.
All 7 countries share the same value as this liberal democratic country, and they also have the same goal to balancing against China. To participate this G7 meeting, even though we are not the member of G7, but as the observers, it can deliver the very significant message to China.
The upcoming diplomatic stage is also widely seen as a litmus test of how the new Korean president will navigate diplomacy, both with the U.S. and China in mind, as he puts forth pragmatic diplomacy. This as Korea also makes its comeback on the diplomatic stage official after a 6-month hiatus following the impeachment of the former leader. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
3 high-profile special prosecution bills were passed during a cabinet meeting presided over by President Lee Jae-myung earlier on this Tuesday morning. The probes will focus on the martial law declaration by former President Yoon Suk-yeol, allegations against former First Lady Kim Gun-hee, and the death of a Marine during flood relief operations in 2023. These bills have been previously vetoed by the Yoon administration, but are now set to take effect. And President Lee Jae-myung has appointed former Trade Chief Yeo Han-koo as a trade minister, who will lead tariff talks with the U.S. Yeo served as a chief negotiator under the former Moon Jae-in government during the first Trump administration. Presidential spokesperson Kang Wi-jung said the appointee has been recognized for his excellent policymaking and negotiating ability with regard to international trade and economic cooperation. Also on Tuesday, Lee Hyung-il, Commissioner of Statistics Korea, was named first Vice Finance Minister, and Park Yun-ju, Minister for South Korea's mission to ASEAN, as first Vice Foreign Minister. The presidential office has announced plans to return to Cheongwade, the former presidential compound, from its current location over in Yongsan. The cabinet has approved a contingency fund of 25.9 billion won, or approximately $18.9 million for that return. This represents 69% of what the previous administration spent on relocating to Yongsan. Now, an exact timeline has not been announced. To ensure a smooth transition, adjustments to public tours have been posted on the Cheongwade Foundation's website. Also on Monday, the presidential office announced that from today on Monday, the public can recommend candidates for positions as cabinet ministers, vice ministers, and heads of public institutions. Recommendations will be accepted through next Monday via the Ministry of Personnel Management's public referrals website, President Lee Jae-myung's official social media channels, or by email to openchoice@korea.kr. Candidates then will undergo a formal vetting and public review process. With the country's new leader elected, South Korea is resuming top-level diplomacy. President Lee Jae-myung held a series of phone talks with foreign leaders, and he is slated to attend the G7 summit. For more details on this, we have our Kim Bo-kyung here in studio. Good evening, Bo-kyung.
Hi, Dami.
So, Bo-kyung, why don't we start with all the phone calls that President Lee had this week?
All right, Dami. Well, as we saw in Chongmin's report, President Lee held his third phone call with his Chinese President Xi Jinping, where he asked China to play a constructive role in denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and invited him to attend the APEC summit that is going to be held here in November. Now, this followed phone calls with U.S. President Trump on June 6th and with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on the 9th. The call with Trump was reportedly conducted in a friendly way where they reaffirmed the importance of the Korea-U.S. alliance. Some expressed concerns over the White House not having issued any formal comment, nor Trump mentioning the call on his social media platform. But an expert I talked to said there was not much to worry about, as Washington could be just taking a cautious approach to better understand Lee's pragmatic diplomacy. Now, in terms of Ishiba, they agreed to build a stronger, more mature bilateral relationship and affirm their commitment to trilateral cooperation with the U.S.
Well, Bo-kyung, first things first, President Lee Jae-myung is set to attend the G7 summit in Canada that is about to take place on June 5th to the 17th as an observer. Now, that will be his debut on the global diplomatic stage, right?
Exactly. His trip to the G7 summit comes less than 2 weeks since his inauguration, and the G7 summit is going to take place in Alberta, and he is going there at Canada's invitation. Now, attending a G7 summit is going to be quite symbolic for South Korea, as it signals the resumption of Korea's top-level diplomacy that had been stalled over the past 6 months following the martial law crisis.
The attendance basically means that we are going to normalize things and actively engage on the diplomatic stage, though we have had a diplomatic vacuum for the past 6 months.
Now, Bo-kyung, with Trump also attending the G7 summit in Canada, is there any possibility of bilateral talks taking place between President Lee and Trump?
Well, Tommy, there's always possibility, and if they get a chance to see each other, it would be the first time in 7 months since the leaders of Seoul and Washington last met in person when former President Yoon Suk-yeol and former U.S. President Joe Biden met each other at the APEC summit held in Peru last November.
Right.
But we need to note that the G7 summit is a multilateral setting and that South Korea has been invited as an observer, as you already said. In this kind of setting, it could be quite difficult to have bilateral talks. Also, according to an expert I talked to, it could be better for us to talk about such challenging issues later on after being fully prepared and when proper talks can be held.
It's not a good idea that we will talk about these very upcoming and very daunting issues and challenges for South Korea, including tariff or cost sharing, and we have to be prepared. We have to have our own the strategy first, and then we will have a very detailed way to prepare all this meeting.
Right, lots of pending issues to deal with the U.S. Now, in the meantime, how about Japan? I mean, if bilateral talks do take place, what can we expect?
Well, as Lee and Ishiba have already expressed their hope to meet in person at an early date during their recent phone talks, there is also a possibility of them having a summit. In terms of Japan, there are still concerns over how President Lee will shape his approach toward Tokyo, as he had taken a confrontational stance regarding historical historical and territorial disputes. Despite such worries, the expert says Seoul will maintain a favorable relationship with Tokyo, largely because the two countries have the same issues to deal with.
Japan is not just a country that helps us keep countries like China and North Korea in check, but also a country like South Korea that is going through some overbearing behavior from the US, and therefore we need to work together in dealing with this.
And maybe that is where we can, see a glimpse of President Lee Jae-myung's so-called pragmatic diplomacy, separating issues of cooperation from those of the past.
Right.
All right, Bo-kyung, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
South Korea's economy continues to be weak, according to a local think tank, which states it's slow construction activity and poor export conditions that are slowing the growth. Our Moon Ji-young has more.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed that the South Korean economy remains subdued overall, noting escalating external uncertainties driven by U.S. tariff hikes. According to the June Economic Trends report released on Tuesday, the Korea Development Institute states that the country's economy is weighed down by continued weakness in the construction sector and a slowdown in exports. The agency stated that construction investment continued its decline, constraining recovery in domestic demand. Overall production growth is also slowing, with the construction sector notably contributing to this deceleration, posing a significant drag on the economy. Exports also showed weakening momentum, especially in sectors heavily exposed to U.S. tariff. This included a continued decline in exports to the U.S., with automobile shipments notably falling by 32% year-on-year. In contrast, manufacturing production maintained solid growth led by semiconductors, with persistent demand supporting robust growth in production, exports, and related equipment investment in this sector. Meanwhile, household and business sentiment showed modest improvement amid easing political uncertainties and progress in trade talks between Washington and Beijing. The Consumer Sentiment Index recovered to the baseline level in May, signaling an easing in the contraction seen since last year.
It seems the situation itself has improved compared to the first quarter. Since interest rate policy is now moving towards an easing stance, I think it might gradually contribute to an improvement in domestic demand.
However, the KDI warned that trade-related uncertainty remains high due to further increases in steel and aluminum tariff and concerns over a potential resurgence of U.S.-China trade tensions. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's current account remained in the black yet again in April. While solid exports helped support the balance, experts do warn that upcoming U.S. tariffs and a slowing global economy could weigh on the surplus going forward. Shin Se-byuk reports.
South Korea posted a current account surplus of $5.7 billion in April. That marks 24 consecutive months in the black since May 2023. According to data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday, the surplus shrank sharply from the previous month, $9.1 billion. But it was still a notable jump from the $1.5 billion surplus recorded a year earlier. The decline was mainly driven by a sharp reversal in the dividend income balance, which swung from a $2.6 billion surplus in March to a $650 million deficit due to concentrated payouts to foreign investors. April's goods account, the largest component of the current account, posted a surplus of around $9 billion, backed by solid export performance. Exports rose nearly 2% on year to $58.6 billion, led by semiconductors and wireless devices. IT exports jumped almost 11%, while auto exports fell by just over 4%. Imports, meanwhile, fell 5.1% to nearly $50 billion, largely due to lower global energy prices, including coal and crude oil. The services account remained in deficit, posting a $2.8 billion shortfall in April, a wider gap than the previous month, as Korean firms spent more on tech licensing, consulting, and platform services. In the first 4 months of the year, the cumulative current account surplus reached nearly $25 billion, up almost $7 billion from the same period last year. But one expert pointed out that these figures reflect a period before new U.S. tariffs took effect and warned the surplus could narrow further in the month ahead.
Lower energy prices may ease imports, but Trump's tariffs could hit exports harder, narrowing the surplus compared to last year.
He also noted that with the global economy slowing, a sharp rise in stock prices is unlikely, and the gains in the primary income account are also likely to remain limited, further narrowing the overall surplus. 신세벽, 아리랑 뉴스.
The South Korean government is drawing a new line on one of the Korean peninsula's most volatile flashpoints, leaflet launches into North Korea. And for the first time in years, Seoul is urging activists to stop. Our North Korean Affairs correspondent Kim Jung-shin reports.
South Korea's new administration is taking its first public steps to reduce tensions with North Korea, formally urging civic groups to stop launching anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border.
The first step in reducing tensions and rebuilding trust between the two Koreas is stopping the leaflet launches and the loudspeaker broadcasts.
The Ministry of Unification's call came after a civic group representing families of North Korean abductees carried out a third leaflet launch this year, despite multiple calls for restraint.
These actions heighten tensions on the Korean peninsula and endanger the lives and safety of residents near the border. We strongly urge an end to leaflet launches.
It's the first formal appeal since South Korea's constitutional court struck down the leaflet ban in 2023 on free speech grounds. While the Yoon Suk-yeol administration tolerated the launches, President Lee Jae-myung appears to be signaling a clear policy reversal.
Even during his campaign, President Lee pledged to manage situations that could trigger inter-Korean clashes. That included restoring previous measures like the ban on anti-North leaflets and loudspeaker broadcasts, and the 2018 inter-Korean military agreement.
Leaflets have long been a flashpoint used by both Koreas as psychological warfare since the peninsula was divided. South Korea ended its state-run campaigns in 2000, but defector-led groups picked up where the government left off. After a 2020 ban was overturned in court, the skies reopened to civic activity, prompting North Korea to retaliate with its own balloon launches carrying trash. After years of policy drift, the new government is renewing calls for restraint, citing public safety. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Protests in Los Angeles stretch into a fifth day, and tensions show no signs of easing. In fact, U.S. President Donald Trump has doubled down on his hardline stance by deploying more troops. Park Hyo-bin has the details.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday ordered an additional 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to be deployed to Los Angeles, significantly expanding the military response to ongoing protests against immigration raids. With the latest deployment, approximately 4,700 military personnel are now said to be involved in controlling protests in the area. The decision comes despite opposition from local officials and California Governor Gavin Newsom, who have raised concerns about the escalating federal involvement. However, Trump called the governor incompetent and insisted that federal intervention was necessary to restore order.
Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order.
The first wave of 2,000 National Guard troops, previously ordered by Trump, began arriving Sunday. According to CNN, about 1,700 members were active in Greater Los Angeles on Monday night. President Trump claimed that the deployment prevented the city from being destroyed.
Thank goodness we sent out some wonderful National Guard. They've really helped in a lot of problems they were having out there. They were afraid to do anything, and we sent out the troops, and they've done a fantastic job.
Even on the fourth day of the protests on Monday, clashes erupted again as protesters shut down major highways, throwing concrete and Molotov cocktails. Cars were set on fire and police responded with tear gas and flashbangs, filling the streets with smoke. According to CBS News, as of midday Monday local time, 53 people have been arrested. Meanwhile, similar anti-ICE protests have popped up around the U.S., including in San Francisco, New York, and Atlanta. According to CNN, at least 150 people were taken into custody in San Francisco as demonstrations continue to grow nationwide. The protests were sparked when Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers and the FBI raided downtown shops in LA last Friday, detaining 44 people. Park Hyubin, Arirang News.
Two BTS members, RM and V, completed their military service on Tuesday, which now leaves just 3 members still on mandatory duty. We may be just weeks away from seeing all 7 of them in one place. Our An Sung-jin has more.
The K-pop kings are making their return. From placards on buses to giant balloons in the sky, hundreds of fans have gathered to celebrate following the completion of mandatory military service. BTS members RM and V were discharged on Tuesday morning, with RM playing the saxophone and V dancing along.
I'll work hard on making a new album to get back on stage.
I have prepared myself physically and mentally, and I can't wait to be back with our fans. I want to say thank you to the Army for waiting for our military service to end.
As the members thanked their fans and hinted at what's next, a reunion seems closer. 3 more members are to return soon, with Jungkook and Jimin scheduled for discharge on Wednesday, and Suga expected to follow later this month. Jin and J-Hope have already been discharged and are actively pursuing solo careers. The members began their military service during their career high, and fans will be waiting for their favorite stars to return. As the entire group will be free of social obligations, many are wondering what's next for BTS. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Cloudy and rainy conditions appear today in central parts of the country. The daytime temperatures did not rise too much. The temperature in Seoul rose up to only 26 degrees Celsius, which is about 4 degrees lower than yesterday. It will be hotter tomorrow all over the country. Until tomorrow morning, gusty winds will blow around the eastern parts of Gangwon-do province. There will be places with strong winds of more than 15 meters per second. In addition, Jeju Island will receive frequent rain until Saturday. Tomorrow morning will start cool with Seoul and Daejeon at 16 degrees, Gwangju at 17 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 29 degrees in Seoul, Daejeon and Gwangju, 31 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. There is rain forecast starting from the Chungcheong-do provinces and southern regions on Friday and spreading to the whole country on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
To set the facts straight. Get Korea right.
여러분, 지금 보고 계신 이 모습, 뭔지 아시나요? 바로 태견입니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 방크 연구원 구승현입니다. 네, 여러분, 지금부터 제가 한국의 전통 무예인 태견에 대해 소개해 드릴게요.
홀세기 섞어라! 섰다!
태견은 유연하고 율동적인 동작인 품밟기라는 우리 고유의 독창적 보법을 중심으로 상대를 발로 차거나 넘기는 기술을 사용하는 무예예요. 그런데 태견을 보고는 전통춤이다, 기술연이다, 도검을 들고 한다, 이크에크 소리는 익살스러운 추임새다 라고 잘못 알고 계신 분들이 있어요. 태견에 대한 오류 정보 바로 잡아볼까요?
섞어라! 해! 섰다!
태견은 부드러운 동작으로 순간적으로 상대방을 압도하는 한국의 전통 무예이자 민속 경기예요. 도검 같은 도구는 쓰지 않는 맨손 무예입니다.
잠깐, 뭔가 하나 빠졌는데요?
네? 뭘요?
태견은 중요 무형문화재거든요. 1983년에 국가가 중요 무형문화재로 지정했습니다. 그리고 2011년에는 무예로서는 최초로 유네스코가 인류 무형문화유산에 등재했죠.
유네스코 인류 무형문화유산으로 등재가 되었다고요? 그리고 세계 최초로요?
예, 세계가 인정한 거죠.
맞네요. 우리 고유의 전통 무예이자 세계가 인정한 문화재인 태견. 앞으로 많은 사랑과 관심 부탁드려요. 한국 바로 알리기에
함께 해주세요.
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyun.
Just 11 days after taking office, President Lee Jae-myung is stepping onto the global stage at the G7 summit, following a rapid series of phone calls with U.S. President Donald Trump, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Each of these calls came with symbolism, strategic weight, and diplomatic expectations, marking Korea's re-entry into high-level diplomacy after months of political paralysis. Now, this moment is more than ceremonial, with tariffs looming, trilateral security tested, and U.S.-China rivalry sharpening. President Lee must show whether his national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy can translate into trust and traction on the world stage. We ask what these early moves signal, not just about Lee's foreign policy direction, but also about how key powers are reading South Korea's place in a reordering Indo-Pacific. For this, we are joined by Min Jung-hoon, professor at Korea National Diplomatic Academy, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor Min.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
And also joining us online is Evans Revere, former acting assistant secretary of state and non-resident senior fellow in the foreign policy program at Brookings. Great to see you.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin our discussion right away. Professor Min, the first phone call between Lee Jae-myung, President Lee Jae-myung and President Trump reaffirmed the alliance, but also included some personal exchanges as well. How did you view that phone call overall, I must ask? And also, to what extent does this personal rapport factor into alliance management, especially in this under the Trump administration?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the new South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and the U.S. President Donald Trump kicked off an effort to build this trust through a phone call Friday, and President Lee had held his first phone conversation with President Trump last Friday, and it was known that they had a phone call on the friendly environment. And during the talks, President Trump congratulated President Lee on his election, and while President Lee pointed out the importance of the ROK-US alliance. And the two leaders converged on the need to work closely together for the development of the alliance. So I'm glad to hear that the leaders agreed to strengthen the alliance between the two countries. In addition, as you mentioned, the two leaders laid a foundation of personal trust when they discussed their experiences with assassination threats on the campaign trail and their shared interest in playing golf. I'm not sure if the President Lee is good at playing golf. Well, I'm not sure. But anyway, they agreed to play golf together in the near future. And there is a growing expectation that President Lee would first meet President Trump in person on the margins of the G7 summit that will take place in Canada in a week. And President Lee's participation in the G7 meeting will send a signal to the global community that South Korean leadership is back, and South Korea will resume its roles actively on the international stage.
So a lot to look forward to between the two sides moving forward. Now, on the other side, the call, people say that the call came unusually late, which is two days later after Lee Jae-myung's inauguration. Mr. Revere, do you think this timing could be read as a concern in terms of diplomatic urgency or alignment as well?
Well, let me begin by offering my own congratulations to President Lee on his victory. And of course, congratulations to the Korean people who have reminded us once again how strong democracy is in the Republic of Korea. But to your question, the call did indeed come a bit later than it normally would, based on precedent. The call was preceded by, I would describe it as an oddly cool White House congratulatory message that made reference to Chinese interference. I haven't heard any serious experts suggest at all that there was any Chinese interference in this election. And indeed, the conservative candidate who lost the election conceded very quickly and very smoothly The White House initial message itself called the election free and fair. So my view is that this was a rather gratuitous comment by a White House representative, and it seemed to try to associate the White House with some of the accusations about Chinese interference and electoral irregularities that have, by and large, come from the political fringe or from conspiracy theorists. So it's really odd what happened there. But the White House message, the delay in that message in arriving, the lack of a White House readout of the call, the delay in arranging the phone call, of course, all of that suggests that the Trump administration may be trying to keep its distance from the new ROK government for now, and maybe waiting to see what policy moves the new administration is going to take in Seoul. But having said that, it was an important call. It was important that it take place. The readout that we've gotten from the Korean side suggests that it was a very positive call, and that's a good thing. And so let's see where we take things from here.
Mm-hmm. Now, with this, Mr. Revere, let's look a little bit more broadly at Yi's diplomatic posture. President Yi has emphasized national interest-driven, pragmatic diplomacy. Do you think this is viewed in Washington as a constructive shift, or is there some unease given, his past criticism of Korea's overly deferential posture towards the U.S.?
Many U.S. observers, including me, quite frankly, have welcomed candidate Lee and now President Lee's emphasis on pragmatism and a more centrist approach on many key issues, including relations with the United States and relations with Japan. And like many other American observers, I certainly hope that this rhetorical shift that we have observed reflects a real shift in the position of both President Lee and his party, mainly because in the past, both he and his party have been associated with some views, including some skepticism towards the United States and the alliance, occasional outbursts of anti-American sentiment from the party, anti-Japanese sentiment, extreme nationalism, and even a troubling occasional flirtation with China. So I think it's fair to say that there is a bit of unease among a number of experts and people in Washington. But there is also, I think, hope that the Democratic Party of Korea and President Lee himself have moved into a new place. And that is, I think, indeed going to be welcomed. I must add, though, in this context, that the nomination by President Lee of a prime minister who was a former student radical who had participated in the occupation of a U.S. cultural and diplomatic facility in downtown Seoul certainly did raise some eyebrows. But I think by and large, most American experts, including people in the U.S. administration, I think are prepared to give President Lee and his team the benefit of the doubt going forward.
Right. As you said, it's still early in the early phases, so we'll really have to see and observe how it goes. Now, let's also shift to the G7 summit. Professor Min, President Yi will debut on the global stage in a few days at the G7 summit with tariff hikes on Korean steel and autos looming. Do you expect any meaningful concessions to emerge from that meeting?
Well, basically, personally, I don't think that the G7 leaders, including President Lee, will actively discuss tariffs and protectionism and possibly form a consensus or reach an agreement about the matters, because the President Trump will also participate in the meetings and possibly lead the conversations. And as you know, U.S. and other European member states, including the Asian member, Japan, have different interests in the trade and the tariff matters. It means that it is more likely that they will just repeat what they want about the matters based on their own national interests and not likely to narrow the gaps during the meetings. Instead, the leaders want to talk more about the common or the shared matters like the Russian-Ukraine war and the technological cooperation like AI and others. Of course, among the matters like the Russia-Ukraine war, as you know, the U.S. and other European member states also seem to have different interests each other, and it would not be easy to narrow the gaps in terms of how to end the war, like on the Russian side, the Ukraine side, and other kind of cooperations between the U.S. and other European member states. So I don't think that they would reach an agreement easily when they talked about those matters, and it's not sure, it's not certain about if they would be able to issue a joint statement after the summit meeting this time. It would be very tough.
Especially with the Ukraine and Russia war top on the agenda. Now, another key moment expected at the G7 is the Lee Jae-myung Ishiba meeting. Mr. Revere, how important do you think this is in signaling whether trilateral Korea, U.S., Japan cooperation built under the Moon and Yoon previous administration can remain intact under this new leadership?
Well, this is going to be an extremely important meeting. I think it's very good that the two leaders, the Japanese Prime Minister and the Korean President, had a call. That call, by all indications, went extremely well. The Japanese people and the Japanese government and Japanese press have noticed the rhetorical shift that has taken place in President Lee's rhetoric and his party's rhetoric about Japan and bilateral relations. I think the Japanese people and the Japanese government is very hopeful that the Republic of Korea and Japan can continue to develop what is often called a future-oriented relationship, which is, I think, extremely important for them to do. And I think there is a fair bit of optimism in Tokyo that is going to be possible. It goes without saying that trilateral cooperation between and among Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the United States, that has been one of the hallmarks of the last two U.S. administrations, including the current one. And so this is an extremely high priority for the United States and will continue to be a high priority. So if the Korean and Japanese leaders can use their encounter on the margins of the G7 meeting in Alberta, and if they can keep up the momentum that they've obviously established in their initial phone call, I'm cautiously optimistic that going forward we can keep all of the fundamental elements, both of bilateral Seoul-Tokyo relations as well as trilateral relations, including the United States. We can keep that momentum going forward.
Right. That would be very fruitful if that's going to be maintained. Now, Lee has taken this pragmatic line on Japan, as we've been speaking, pursuing this forward-looking ties and also holding firm on historical issues. We have a very special relationship with Japan, of course. Now, his call with Prime Minister Ishiba also emphasized mutual trust and communication as well. Professor Min, how likely do you think this two-track approach to hold up during their expected G7 meeting?
Okay, so let me first elaborate a little bit about what President Lee said during the campaign trail about the South Korean relations with Japan. And President Lee, or the Lee government's pragmatic diplomacy, pursues to cultivate a favorable strategic environment for South Korea in East Asia. To do that, based on their strong ROK-US alliance. The ROK-US alliance should be the cornerstone of maintaining the favorable environment, strategic environment for South Korea in this region. And based on the strong ROK-US alliance, the Lee government want to strengthen the trilateral cooperation among South Korea, U.S., and Japan. And the Lee government also want to advance its bilateral relations with Japan. So basically, I believe that the Lee government want to pursue the continuity in terms of its relations with Japan, based on what happened during the last South Korean presidency. And as you know, this year, the two countries, South Korea and Japan, got the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations. And the Lee government has declared its intention to address like a two-track approach, historical and territorial issues with principles, while promoting future-oriented cooperation in social, cultural, and economic matters and security to build a consistent, stable, and coherent bilateral networks framework in the years ahead. Of course, it's just still the rhetoric, but yet I believe that the Lee government would confirm its rhetoric in terms of the policies and the actions in the years ahead. And during the 25 minutes, the conversation, President Lee and the Prime Minister Ishiba reaffirmed the importance of the bilateral ties between the two countries and expressed hope to meet in person at an early stage. So I think that the two leaders will meet in person at the upcoming G7 meeting, and they will just build a personal trust at the meeting and just confirm what they want at the government level and in the years ahead. And they also, during the phone conversations, they also agreed to promote people-to-people exchanges and enhance communication between the government. So we will see the kind of shuttle the diplomacy between the countries in the years ahead. So I hope that there would be no historical disputes between the two countries. And I believe that the two leaders will focus more on enhancing the cooperation and try to stably manage the sensitive historical and territorial issues in the coming months.
Well, many of us will be looking forward to that. Now, we've mentioned a while ago that President Lee has had phone calls with Prime Minister Shiba and also Chinese President Xi Jinping, but many are pointing out about the order of the calls. It's quite different from the previous liberal Moon Jae-in administration where Chinese or this time, President Lee spoke first with Japanese Prime Minister, and then he spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which was as opposed to the previous Moon Jae-in administration. What do you make of this sequencing, Professor Min?
Well, of course, it's too early to see the actually confirmed what the Lee government actually wants in terms of its relations with the neighbor countries around the Korean Peninsula. But still, I think that the Lee government pursues as you mentioned, national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy. And it is grounded in their strong ROK-US alliance. And based on the alliance, it pursues the strengthening the trilateral cooperation among the three countries, South Korea, US, and Japan. It has got the continuity again in terms of its relations with the two very important neighboring countries, US and Japan. So there would be a little change in terms of how Lee government cares about its relations with the two important countries. And based on that kind of strong relations with the two countries, Lee government also want to manage favorable relations with China. As you know, China is still important trade partner for South Korea and has been the important player for the security on the Korean Peninsula. But still, the Lee government want to put priority to manage the favorable relations with the US and Japan, and then try to manage its relations with China. It would be new normal of the South Korea, even for the progressive government.
Let's delve deeper into the talk with China, Mr. Revere. During the dialogue, Xi Jinping has emphasized the original spirit of normalization and urged South Korea to defend supply chain multilateralism, seen as a pushback to America's containment. And Yi responded by praising China's leadership and development. In this context, with the G7 preparing strong Indo-Pacific messaging, how do you think South Korea can avoid being boxed into one camp amid deepening rivalry between the two big powers?
It's a good question. The camp, if you want to use that word, that the Republic of Korea is in is, of course, one that was dictated by historical necessity. It was dictated by the North Korean invasion in 1950, followed, of course, by China's invasion of the Korean Peninsula, fighting on behalf of its North Korean ally in the hope of achieving North Korea's goal of the violent unification of the Korean Peninsula under North Korean rule. Since then, since the horror of the Korean War, the Republic of Korea has been a close and firm ally and partner of the United States, and nobody knows that better than Beijing, which today is, of course, continuing to try to drive wedges between the United States and the Republic of Korea. It's important, I think, for South Koreans today to remember this history and to keep in mind the importance of the U.S.-ROK alliance and the role that that alliance has played in preserving South Korea's independence, South Korea's sovereignty, and the role that the partnership of the United States has played in contributing to South Korea's own economic and political development. And so I think going forward, it's going to be very important for South Koreans to remember that and to look at the relationship with China in the context of that very problematic history. And I think most Koreans will look at it that way.
All right, Mr. Revere, thank you for your opinion on that. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight. Professor Min.
Thank you.
And Mr. Revere, we appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.